I'm Kelly Anthony. This is the Anthony Kitchen, and today we are doing something very special with one of summer's most bountiful crops. Now, I don't know what it's like in the rest of the United States, but down here in the South, when it gets hot, it is summer squash season, and it's time to make yellow squash casserole. This specific recipe is a dish that I have loved forever, and I have been bringing it to potluck barbecues since my college days. It features yellow squash that's been chopped up and sautéed on the stovetop with an onion. Then we're gonna bring it back over to the countertop. We'll whip up a quick and easy custard that makes for a creamy, rich, perfect filling. And then we're gonna top it off with Ritz crackers and cheese. It doesn't get a whole lot more comforting, and it definitely isn't going to get more delicious than this. So the recipe comes together really quick and really easy, and it starts with about 2.5 pounds of yellow squash. Now this is squash that we actually harvested from our garden outside, and so you'll notice that some are a little bit smaller. It's early in the season, so we haven't gotten the big ones yet. But what I like about the smaller squash is when they're harvested early, their skin isn't quite as thick. So what does this mean? This means I can peel less squash. All the yeses on that. So I'm just gonna peel the big ones, and then the rest of them, I'm gonna leave the skin on and just chop them up. You can peel all the squash if this isn't a task that you completely despise. It will make for a smoother filling. I don't mind my squash having a little bit of texture to it in the casserole, but like I said, if you want it to be smoother, go ahead and peel all of them. Okay, that ought to do it for the big ones, and now let's get to chopping. Grab a handy dandy chef's knife and take the tip right off. Then we're gonna cut off the bottom end, and now I'm going to show you the easiest way in the world to dice squash. So what you're gonna do first is cut it in half lengthwise. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our knife and sort of follow along and cut lengthwise again. Just follow along the shape of the squash. Perfect. And now I do wanna dice it a little bit small, so I'm gonna cut these into smaller strips. I've kind of got everything sectioned off, and I'm just gonna give it a good chop. Just like so. Transfer them over to the bowl and keep it moving. Okay, we're at the tail end. This was about 5 to 7 squash on the smaller side. If you have larger squash, you could probably get away with maybe just 4 squash, but I always think it's best to weigh them. This is all the squash. As you can see, it's a lot. It's gonna cook down a bit, but it's definitely going to feed a crowd. Okay, next on the list, the only other thing that we really have to chop is a yellow onion. Now for the onion, we wanna do just like a medium dice on this. Nothing really has to be cut too fine for this recipe. Okay, so what happens next is we move it over to the stovetop. I'm going to add a little bit of oil. You can use canola oil, avocado oil, olive oil, really whatever you want for this portion of the recipe. So I'm gonna drizzle the oil into a hot pan over the stovetop, and then in goes the onion, followed by the squash. Okay, so we're gonna add the onions, give them a good mix. Now we'll add in the squash. This is a lot of squash. It's gonna take just a little bit to cook down. Give it at least 10 minutes or so, maybe up to 15, depending on how big or little you diced your squash. We also want to use this time to season the squash, so we're going to add about a teaspoon of salt and right about a half teaspoon of pepper. Once the squash stops releasing water, you know it's done. Okay, this looks great. Just gonna set this aside and get started on the rest of our filling. We're gonna add 1 egg to the bowl. We'll go ahead and give it a good mix. Now in goes the heavy cream. To that, we're gonna add about a tablespoon of granulated sugar, a generous pinch of salt, and a little pinch of black pepper. Just give this a stir. and we'll set it aside. The next ingredient going into our squash casserole and on top of our squash casserole is grated Colby Jack cheese. I love Colby Jack cheese because it is a great melting cheese with good flavor. So we'll just move this glorious mound of cheesy goodness off to the side, and it's on to the Ritz crackers. What you're gonna do is you want about a sleeve of Ritz crackers. That's about 30 Ritz crackers, and you can put them in a bowl. You could also use a Ziploc bag and a rolling pin if you wanna keep your hands clean, but this is the easiest way to get into them. So I am just gonna give them a good crush. It doesn't take much to tear these guys apart. And now it is time to assemble the casserole. We're gonna start by adding the yellow squash to a large bowl. Just spoon it right in there. And to that, we're gonna add our custard, about half of the Ritz crackers, and a generous handful of Colby Jack cheese. Sprinkle that right in, okay? Give it a nice little mix. So adding the Ritz inside of the casserole and not just on top of the casserole is gonna help to give that casserole a little more body, and that egg in there is gonna help to bind it while it cooks in the oven. So good. Okay, now we're gonna add it to the casserole dish. I'm gonna give this a good spritz with my cooking spray to ensure we can actually get the casserole out. Then just pour the filling right into the dish. Spread it out. Oh, this is gonna be so good. And then you're gonna top it with a last little layer of cheese. Spread it around, make it nice and even. I like to leave the edges a little bit open so that you can see that squash coming out from the sides. Okay, and now it's time for the Ritz. Just, oh, looking so good. And what you want to do to make sure that those Ritz have a really nice golden color when they bake up is just give the whole shebang another spritz with your cooking spray. The casserole is fully assembled. Now what we're gonna do is top it off with some aluminum foil. Just pop it right over the top, and we're gonna bake it covered for 30 minutes. Then we're gonna take that foil off and let it go for another 10 minutes in a 325-degree oven. Ta-da! Y'all, it's so bubbly and it smells so good. We're gonna put some finishing touches on the casserole. So I'm just gonna set this guy aside over here and bring in the chopping block. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to pull a few leaves off of some flat leaf parsley, and I'm gonna give it a rough chop. Now this isn't necessary, you don't have to add this, but what I like about it is it gives it another pop of color, and it also adds a little bit of freshness to a really savory casserole. It really just makes a huge difference in the look of this casserole. It is so pretty. Okay, the steam is gone. I think it's safe. Y'all, you are going to love this recipe. It's cheesy, it's creamy. You definitely get the flavor of the squash in there. Use this recipe to show up and show out at all of your barbecue potlucks all summer long, or for family gatherings all throughout the year. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Anthony Kitchen, and to theanthonykitchen.com for hundreds upon hundreds of awesome Southern influenced recipes, perfect for entertaining. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.